Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, our group will present to you the study case of nation state Iraq. So I'll be the first presenter. Let's move forward. So the state of Iraq is a special state and different than most of the countries in the world. If you put the name of Iraq in the Google images search, the images you will find are exactly these images that you see here. I took the first 10 images that are associated with Iraq in Google. And it wasn't war in Iraq, soldiers in Iraq, no, it was just war in Iraq. And we see the first picture, soldiers, second picture, soldier, 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 all of them is something about war. The case of Iraq is really, really sad. And even I will say it was difficult to make this presentation. And sometimes when I was reading its history, I was even crying. So inshallah we will present how did this sad, super sad situation happen, that everyday people have to die there. We'll start with the table of contents. First we'll present the history of colonialism and independence. Then we'll go to Iraq today to see the statistics and so on. And the third presenter will present to you the issues of secularism, liberalism and human rights. So to begin with, here we see the map of Iraq. Probably all of you know where it is. It's in the Middle East. So let's start with the history of Iraq. As we know, it was controlled by the Ottoman Empire up until the First World War, when the Arabs, influenced by the nationalism and so on, they rebelled against them during the First World War. We had promised to establish an Arab state. However, we got tricked, and what we got, several countries with different mandates, either British or French. So this mandate was going up to 1932. Why they gave independence to Iraq? Because people were rebelling. They found it was difficult to control it as a mandate. So we just gave the independence for the same king that used to be the pro-British ruler under the mandate. So from 1932 until 1958, the Iraq was a kingdom. It was ruled by a king, more or less powerful. But again, because of the nationalism and so on, what we did, we rebelled against the king and we killed him. We made a coup and we established a republic. There was a Ba'ath party, a nationalist Arab party, who took the control of Iraq in 1958. And soon after, there was another coup and so on, a lot of messed up things. And well-known Saddam Hussein took control a few years later until 2003. So to talk about the Saddam Hussein rule in general, in the beginning it wasn't so bad, but the first and probably the biggest mistake he made that he was not able to repair was the war with Iran. As you know, there happened an Iranian revolution, and because of this revolution there was a big fear that it will spread in Iraq. So what he did, he just started the war with Iran to stop this revolution. And it costed 10 years of war. He was not able to win it, to get anything beneficial from it. He had to spend a lot of money for that. And a lot of problems happened, like Kurdish rebellions, on which he used the chemical weapons. That became the main reason for the sanctions from the United States. So in the end of his rule, in 2001, we all know that 9/11 happened, and the United States President George Bush said that we are having war with terrorism, and then we wanted to invade Iraq. So we made up some stuff, like, for example, that Saddam Hussein has a connection with the Taliban. This was first thing made out. Security of the United States themselves, they said for their government that no, there is no relationship between Taliban and Saddam Hussein, but in the end we made up that there is. Another thing, we made up that there is a mass destruction weapon in Iraq which never existed. So we decided that we will invade Iraq to fix these things, to fix the dictator. And what happened during this war and after this war was just disaster, one huge disaster. Iraq almost became a failed state because the Saddam Hussein was of course thrown out and all of his government was destroyed. During this war, all the different sects started fighting each other, killing each other every day under the new government that was established by the United States. A few years passed, and then it became stabilized. So what does it mean, stabilized? That there is only one explosion in a day in the whole country. So it was already a very normal life. So imagine if you will hear somebody exploded a bomb in Kuala Lumpur, you will feel it's disaster. But in this place, every day there is bombing and it's considered as normal. Can you imagine that? Since the war with Iran, Iraq is almost always in war. Since the 1980s, in war with Iran. After that, there was war with Kuwait. Then a few years, no war, but sanctions from the United States, malnutrition, people dying. And from 2003, we are in war until today. There was research made in the Mosul of psychological state of children, and we found out that even more than 1/3 of the children have psychological problems. Can you imagine what will happen in a country that 1/3 of its youth has psychological problems, that we are not psychologically healthy? This is really, really disaster. Okay, now let's talk about the nationalism in Iraq. So we find something very interesting here. As you know, when it was under the Ottoman Empire, it actually used to be three separate wilayat, three different land units. What happened from these complete different land units, different people, we became into one. We have to become one country, one nation. So we know that this thing is not working out, and we see that in the north there is Kurdish territory, a lot of Kurdish. In middle there are Sunni Arab, and in the eastern and south we find a lot of Shia. And we see the main two cities, the Baghdad and Mosul. We are in between. We are shared. Baghdad is shared by Shia and Sunni, and Mosul is shared by Kurdish and Sunni Arabs. So the thing, of course, because of this nationalism, there was always Kurdish nationalism that is inspired also by Americans. So the nation building in this country's nation state is very difficult. I don't believe they can build it. From the beginning, there should be no Iraq. It's a fake country. I don't know what was in their mind to create, except their mind to destroy it. And interestingly, if we see every problem which is happening now in Iraq, it's going back to this issue of three nations in one country. Because we have Kurdish that want to fight for their rights, because we want to get as much autonomy as possible. We have their own language. And we have Shia Arabs that are close to Iran, and Iran is also Shia. So we are always influenced by Iran. And of course, after the United States came to Iraq, we made this chaos. Iran had to put its hand on the Shia, and to fight them, the United States put their hand on the Arab Sunnis. So basically, the reality is that the Iraqis have no control over their country, and it's controlled by the influences of the Americans and Iranians. So that's from me. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Luqman Hakim bin Murshidi. So today I would like to continue the presentation about the Iraq. So the first one is about political system in Iraq. So the Republic of Iraq is a parliamentary democracy. It was introduced gradually after the United States-led invasion in 2003 that toppled down the regime of Saddam Hussein. So in the World Democracy Index, Iraq was ranked 118 out of 167 countries. So the practice election system, the most powerful political office is the Prime Minister, who heads the Council of Ministers. Prime Minister is nominated by the strongest parliamentary party or coalition of parties that hold the majority seats. The parliament also chooses the president of the republic, who has few real powers but who can act as an informal mediator between rival political groups. So in contrast with the regime of Saddam Hussein, where all the powers are concentrated in the hands of the president. So they practice separation of powers between executive, legislative and judiciary. Some say that practice hybrid regime. Iraq is practicing hybrid regime, which is flawed democracy and authoritarian regime. So a hybrid regime is a mixed type of political regime that is often created as a result of an incomplete transition from an authoritarian regime to a democratic one. So hybrid regimes combine autocratic features with democratic ones and can simultaneously hold political repression and regulate election. So here are some key features of Iraq political system. So the first one is Kurdistan Regional Government, which is KRG. So Kurdish region that located in the northern Iraq enjoy a high degree of autonomy with their own government, parliament and security forces. So Kurdish controlled territories are rich in oil, and division of profits from oil exports is a major stumbling block in relation between KRG and the central government in Baghdad. So the second one is coalition governments. Since the free election in 2005, no one party managed to establish a solid enough majority to form the government on its own. So as a result, Iraq is normally ruled by a coalition of parties, which resulting in plenty of infighting and political instability. So the next one is provincial authorities. So Iraq is divided into 18 provinces, each with its own governor and a provincial council. So next, we move on to the corruption in Iraq. So in ranking as per 2019, Iraq was ranked 162 out of 198 countries. So the score is 20 out of 100. So we can see here the chart. So the lesser the score, the highly corrupted a country is. So corruption in the public and private sectors carries remarkably high risk for business investing in Iraq. So the government of Iraq is facing several obstacles, including corruption and security challenges, which render the state very fragile. So the Accountability Act criminalized corrupt acts such as passive and active bribery, abuse of office and extortion. But the Iraqi government failed to implement the anti-corruption laws, which result to the bribery and giving gifts to get things done are widespread practice in Iraq, despite being illegal. So corruption in Iraq happen in many sectors, for example in judicial system, police, public service, land administration and more. So corruption still be the main issue among Iraqis. Corruption is primarily driven forward by the structure of the political system itself and the role of the Iraq's political parties play in it. So an extensive opinion poll had carried out across the Iraq, which is in the poll 82% of Iraqis were concerned or very concerned about corruption at the highest level of the government. 83% perceive corruption to be getting worse day by day. So it appears clearly that politically sanctioned corruption among seniors, political and civil servants is systematically undermining popular faith in the Iraqi government and destroying the legitimacy of its leader in the eyes of the population. Okay, so we move on to the literacy and education in Iraq. So when we talk about literacy, we can talk also about the education in Iraq. So the index of literacy, we can see in 2015 there is 80%. So in 2017 the percentage is increased to 85.60%. So the education in Iraq, Iraqi education is strictly controlled by the national Iraqi government through the Iraqi Ministry of Education. So this public state education is provided free from primary school all the way to the doctoral degrees. However, there is a private education institute also, but the contrasted expense of these schools make them unattractive to most Iraqi citizens, so they prefer the free education. So the main attraction to them is their freedom or lack of control by the Iraqi government. So the Iraqi can choose whatever courses that they want to study without the restriction from the government. So the official educational cycle in Iraq extends to 12 years, including 6 years of mandatory primary school started from age 6, grade 1 to 6, 3 years of intermediate school, grade 7 to 9, and 3 years of secondary school from grades 10 to 12. So in secondary school, there are two courses that they can choose. The first one is secondary of scientific and literary. The second one is secondary of vocational, industrial, agricultural and commercial. So there is a strict education policy applied in the Iraq education, where students must take the baccalaureate exam to complete the secondary school and to get the certificate. Those who pass the exam can pursue their study to college and universities. However, to those who did not pass, they can retake the exam by joining the secondary school for 1 more year, and they can take the exam for the second time. However, if they still do not pass for the second time, they are not eligible to attend any school or college anymore. So those who do not pass the exam has led to the increasing number of the youth joining the terrorist group. Perhaps they join because they can't secure a proper job, so they join the terrorist group. I don't know how the terrorist group can give them money apart from securing a proper job. So yeah, The next one is universities. Students are accepted in Iraqi universities based on high school certificate and equivalent. So students who pass the baccalaureate exam are assigned a degree by the Iraqi national government. Students attend college for 4 years for most degree before receiving the undergraduate degree. So it is similar to us. It is common. It is standardized for degree 4 years. But degrees in veterinary, pharmacy and dentistry need 5 years to complete, while medicine degree takes 6 years to complete. So each student has the option to either pursue more education, for example in the postgraduate level, or to enter the workforce. So languages of study are Arabic and English in the university that located in the center and the southern part of Iraq. But French is used only in the University of Mosul, while there are Kurdish and English languages in the university that located in the northern part of the Iraq. Okay, so we move on to the economic in Iraq. So the GDP for Iraq as per 2018 is 224.228 billion US dollar. So the economy of Iraq is dominated by the oil sector, which has provided about 99.7% of foreign exchange earnings in modern times. So traditionally, most of Iraq's manufacturing activity has been closely connected to the oil industry. So the major industry in that category have been petroleum refining and the manufacture of chemicals and fertilizers. So as of 2018, oil is responsible for over 65% of GDP. 90% of government revenue is come from the oil sector. So petroleum constitute 94% of Iraq's export with a value of 59.73 billion US dollar in 2017. So Iraq also is a founding member of OPEC, which is the organization of the petroleum exporting countries. So the minor contributor to Iraq's economy is the agriculture, which contribute just 3.3% of Iraq's GDP. So major agricultural products are cereals, including wheat and barley. Iraq is also a producer of dates, sheep and goat meat, chicken meat, and milk. So as per current situation, Iraq has been in the fragile situation due to the collapse of the international oil prices as well as some political conflicts. So this situation become worse due to the spread of the COVID-19, which the country healthcare system has limited capacity to contain and manage the situation of the COVID-19. So the government of Iraq has responded to the mass protest by the Iraqis by announcing a stimulus package consisting of considerable expansion in public sector employment, pensions and transfer. However, this response was seen by some as ineffective, as boosting job creation, stimulating private sector participation, and enacting meaningful anti-corruption measures require long-term structural reform that did not feature in the package. So in short, Iraq is expected to face a persistent current account deficit in 2020, driven as well by lower oil price in sticky import. So we can say that all countries around the world is currently struggling on reviving their economy, including our country, Malaysia. So yeah, hopefully the economy will going well after period of time. So thank you very much. That's all from me. Assalamualaikum.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Shakib Idrus, and I will continue to discussing about Iraq, the topic of secularism, liberalism, and rights in Iraq. Okay. Next, we will continue to secularism. We will talk about secularism in Iraq, the history of secularism in Iraq. Iraq became a secular state in 1932 after its independence. The country today known as Iraq was a region of the Ottoman Empire. The partition of the Ottoman Empire in the 20th century. It was made up of 3 provinces that called Vilayat in the Ottoman language, which are Mosul Vilayat, Baghdad Vilayat, and Basrah Vilayat. The Iraqi Republic, colloquially known as the First Iraqi Republic, was a state forged in 1985, 1958, under the rule of President Muhammad Najib al-Rubai and the Prime Minister Abdul Karim Qasim. Okay, this is the previous flag before the latest flag of Iraq. Okay, this is the Muhammad Najib al-Rubai. He as the first president of Iraq, which also a chairman of Sovereignty Council from 14 July 1958 to 8 February 1963. And this is Abdul Karim Qasim Muhammad Bakr al-Fadli al-Zubaydi. He was an Iraqi army brigadier and nationalist who ascended into power when the Iraqi monarchy was overthrown during 14 July revolution. Okay, we move to history of secularism in Iraq, in Republic and Ba'athist Iraq. In 1958, a coup d'etat known as the 14 July Revolution was led by Brigadier General Abdul Karim Qasim. This revolt was strongly anti-imperial and anti-monarchical in nature and had strong socialist elements. Qasim controlled Iraq through military rule. In 1958, he began a process of forcibly reducing the surplus amount of land owned by a few citizens and having the state redistribute the land. Okay, we will continue to the end of secularism in Iraq. It is not the end, but there is the end of the government secular in Iraq. The failure of and brutality of secular government, the separation of religious political movement, international sanction and their effect on society at large, and to advance an Islamic political doctrine. This is the main, I think the main reason that secularism end in Iraq, to challenge and eventually subside all leftist ideologies in Iraq. And Iraq new ruling class has much to deal with corruption, terrorism, and economic breakdown. When at that time they had a problem with the huge debt in the world. Okay, we move to Kurdistan secularism. Secularism in Kurdish region of Iraq. The Kurdistan Secular Center was formally established during public meeting held in April 2015 in Sulaimania, Iraqi Kurdistan. It is the first secular center in Kurdistan and Iraq that promotes secularism and calls for the separation of religion from the state and governing system. The center was established by academics, intellectual and political and human rights activists. Okay, we move to we continue that the center will organize and direct a secularist movement that seek to implement the aim of the secularism charter in Kurdistan. The first is a complete separation of religion and state and the removal of religion from the constitution. Full equality for all people before the law regardless of their religion, beliefs, gender, ethnicity or nationality. Full gender equality with regard to economic, legal and social rights. Freedom of speech, expression, criticism, research and thought, creativity and invention. The removal of religious influence from the personal status law and penal code and rewriting of these codes on secular principle. A secular education system disconnect from religious institution, and at last the end of financial support for religious institutions from the state and prohibition of all form of violence and the incitement of violence, hatred or excommunication by any religious institution. Okay, we move to the clash of secularists and Islamists of culture in Iraq. There is clash between culture war in Iraq between secularists and Islamists. Okay, the first one is Iraq's political battles have subsided with the announcement of a new government approved by parliament, but the country culture war continues unabated. The fight is between religious political parties, the Islamists and secularist Iraqis. For the first time, Iraq's secular community is feeling strong enough to fight back in public against what is seen as a religious excess. There have been street demonstrations against the Baghdad municipal government, recent ban on alcohol sales and shuttering of nightclubs, and they have an effort to banish music and dance from the curriculum Baghdad's Fine Art Academy, remove status of the college deemed indecent and annual art festival in Babylon. This move give a serious and dangerous sign, say Maysun al-Damluji. Okay, this is Maysun al-Damluji, which are the politician, which is a politician with the secularist Iraqi party. They had said the Iraqis are Muslim and vast majority are Muslim, but they don't like to have religion imposed on them. That what she said as a secularist Iraqi party. Okay, we move to the liberalism. Okay, liberalism is a political and moral philosophy based on liberty, consent of the governed and equality before the law, international sanction and their effect on society at large. Of the many conventional wisdom of American foreign policy, none is more misleading than the notion that the Iraq War was a product of liberalism. The 2000 Iraq War was one of the great disasters of the history of American foreign policy. Okay, this is a timeline, the imposition of liberalism in Iraq. You all can see the introduction, turn to Saddam Hussein rule, turn to US invasion, and the result. Okay, this is Saddam Hussein. Abdul Majid al-Tikriti was the 5th president of Iraq from 16 July 1979 until 9 April 2003. He is the main character in Iraq that the world know. Okay. In 21st century, the war that most popular war that I can say is Iraq War. Iraq War, also called Second Persian Gulf War, 2003 until 2011. The conflict in Iraq that consists of two phases. The first of this was a brief conventional war in March until April 2003, in which combined force of troops from the United States and Great Britain invaded Iraq. They invaded Iraq and rapidly defeated Iraqi military and paramilitary force. It was followed by longer second phase in which US-led occupation of Iraq was opposed by insurgency. After violence began to decline in 2007, the United States reduced its military presence in Iraq, formally completing it with withdrawal in December 2011. We move to next topic, which is rights, and they have two topic under this topic, which are the human rights and women rights. For the first one, human rights. Human rights in Iraq, according in the following. The first one is human rights in pre-Saddam Iraq. Next, human rights in Saddam Hussein Iraq. Human rights in post-invasion of Iraq. Human rights in Iraqi Kurdistan. Human rights in ISIS-controlled territory. And the last, human rights in Islamic country. But I will not explain all of this, but a few of these I will explain to you. Okay, for the first one is human rights in pre-Saddam Iraq. In this time, they are lacking of various degrees among the various regimes that rule the country. Human rights abuse in the country predate the rule of Saddam Hussein. In the 1920s, when Britain had a mandate from the League of Nations, British occupational force under the command of Arthur Harris used mustard gas and delayed action bombing to suppress Iraqi resistance to British rule, leading to numerous civilian casualties. Human rights violations in Iraq often came from conflict between the country's rulers and members of distinct ethnic communities, especially the Kurds and Shiite Arabs. Although Sunni Arabs, members of the minority that fill the top position in the regime after 1958 and through Saddam years in power, could fill the rest of the ruler for the reason unrelated ethnic conflict. Okay. They have to major conflict with the ethnicity, which conflict with the Shiites and conflict with the Kurdish. And we move to human rights in Saddam Hussein Iraq. Iraq's era under President Saddam Hussein was notorious for its severe violation of human rights. Some of the methods Saddam and country Ba'athism government used to maintain control with using secret police, state terrorism, torture, mass murder, genocide, ethnic cleansing, forced disappearance, destruction of southern Iraq. Iraqi citizens were not legally allowed to assemble unless it was to express support for the government. Police checkpoints on Iraq roads and highways prevent ordinary citizens from travelling across country without government permission, and expensive exit visa prevented Iraqi citizens from travelling. And next, before travelling, an Iraqi citizen had to post collateral, and Iraqi females could not travel outside of the country without escort of a male relative. Okay, human rights in Kurdistan region. Minority rights in Kurdistan. We will talk about minority rights in Kurdistan. Although the Kurdish Regional Parliament has officially recognized other minorities such as Assyrians, Turkmen, Arabs, Armenians, Shabaks, and Yazidis, there have been multiple accusations of attempts to Kurdify them. The Assyrians have reported Kurdish officials reluctant in rebuilding Assyrian village in their region, while constructing more settlement for the Kurds affected during the Anfal campaigns. The position reserved for minority in the Kurdish parliament were appointed by Kurds. Women's rights in Kurdistan. The discrimination and violence against women. Union Kurdish women lobby for legal reform in Iraqi civil law, and it succeeded in bringing marriage under civil control and abolishing honor killing. This is the proof that women have been upgraded their status by the first judge, female judge in the Middle East was a Kurdish woman. And after establishment of KRG, women were enabled to form their own organization, and several women became ministers in the cabinet local government. Okay, we move to women's rights. The status of women in Iraq at the beginning of the 21st century affected by many factors: sectarian religion conflict, debates concerning Islamic law and Iraq institution, cultural tradition, modern secularism. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi women are widowed as a result of the series of war and internal conflict. Women's rights organizations struggle against harassment and intimidation, while they work to promote improvement to women's status in the law, in education, the workplace, and many other spheres of Iraqi life, to curtail abusive traditional practices such as honor killing and forced marriage. Okay, the gender gap with regard of Iraq literacy rates in narrowing. Overall, 26% of Iraqi women are illiterate and 11% of Iraqi men. Girls are less likely than boys to continue their education at the primary level, and their enrollment numbers drop sharply after that. The education level attained Iraqi women and women in 2007 were you can see in the chart or tables the percent of education in Iraq between male and females. Okay, thank you. That's all from me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.